Sex education for adults, engaging speech. Most adults think sex education is something you either know by now or missed forever. But the truth is, many of us grew up with information not understanding. We learn biology, warnings, and rules, but almost nothing about desire, communication, emotional safety, boundaries, or why intimacy actually works the way it does. Adult sex education isn't about learning how to have sex. It's about learning how to experience intimacy without confusion, shame, or silence. It's about understanding why attraction changes, why desire sometimes disappears, why communication feels hard, and why sex can feel disconnected even in loving relationships. As adults, our bodies carry experiences, stress, expectations, past relationships, emotional patterns. All of that shows up in intimacy. Sex doesn't happen in isolation. It happens through the nervous system, self-worth, attachment, and emotional awareness. When those things aren't understood, sex becomes something people perform instead of something they feel. Real sex education for adults teaches presence over performance, communication over guessing, and awareness over shame. It helps people understand themselves first, because intimacy with others starts with intimacy with yourself. This is the education most people never received, but desperately need. 5 key points of the speech. 1, desire changes, and that's normal. Desire isn't constant or automatic. It responds to emotional safety, stress, connection, and self-perception. Understanding this removes shame and helps adults stop personalizing natural changes in attraction. 2, sex reflects emotional health. How you experience sex often mirrors how safe, seen, and regulated you feel emotionally. Intimacy improves when emotional awareness improves. 3, communication is more important than chemistry. Attraction may start connection, but communication sustains it. Talking about needs, boundaries, and changes is what makes sex fulfilling long-term. 4, boundaries create better intimacy. Clear boundaries increase trust and desire. Adults who know and express their limits experience safer, more satisfying intimacy. 5, presence matters more than performance. Pleasure deepens when attention shifts from impressing to feeling. Being present in your body and emotions is the key to meaningful intimacy. Key point 1, expanded desire changes, and that's normal. One of the most damaging myths adults carry into intimacy is the belief that desire should be constant. Many people think that if attraction fades, something is wrong with the relationship, with their partner, or with themselves. Real sex education for adults starts by correcting this misunderstanding. Desire is dynamic, not fixed. Desire responds to emotional, psychological, and physiological conditions. Stress, exhaustion, emotional distance, unresolved conflict, life transitions, and self-image all influence how desire shows up. When these factors change, desire changes too. This isn't failure, it's feedback. In the early stages of connection, novelty fuels desire. The brain releases high levels of dopamine, which creates excitement and intensity. Over time, novelty naturally decreases, and the nervous system shifts towards safety and familiarity. This transition is healthy, but many people misinterpret it as loss of attraction rather than evolution. Without this understanding, adults often personalize desire changes. They assume I'm not attractive anymore, or I don't love them the same way. These beliefs create anxiety, pressure, and self-doubt, all of which further suppress desire. The problem becomes psychological, not relational. Another overlooked factor is emotional safety. Desire thrives when people feel emotionally seen and respected. When communication breaks down or emotional needs go unmet, desire often retreats as a form of self-protection. The body doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to safety. Self-perception also plays a major role. Adults carry years of experiences that shape how they feel in their bodies. Stress, shame, comparison, and self-criticism can quietly shut down desire. When someone feels disconnected from themselves, intimacy with others becomes harder. Sex education rarely teaches that desire requires maintenance. Emotional presence, curiosity, novelty through connection, and open communication keep desire alive. Desire doesn't stay strong by accident. It stays alive through attention. Understanding that desire changes normalizes the experience. It shifts the question from what's wrong to what's influencing this. That shift reduces blame and opens the door to growth. Most importantly, fluctuating desire does not mean love is gone. Love and desire operate differently. Love is attachment and commitment. Desire is responsiveness and stimulation. Both can coexist, but they don't always move in the same rhythm. This is adult sex education they never taught you. Desire isn't a promise, it's a response. When adults understand this, they stop chasing unrealistic expectations and start creating the emotional conditions that allow desire to return naturally, honestly, and without shame. Key point 2, expanded sex reflects emotional health. Sex is often treated as a separate part of life, something physical, private, or instinctual. But for adults, sex is rarely just about the body. It is a reflection of emotional health, self-awareness, and how safe someone feels within themselves and with others. When emotional health is stable, intimacy tends to feel connected. When it's strained, sex often becomes confusing, distant, or mechanical. Your nervous system plays a central role in intimacy. When you feel emotionally regulated, calm, secure, and grounded, your body is more open to pleasure and connection. When you're stressed, anxious, or emotionally overwhelmed, the nervous system prioritizes survival over intimacy. Desire fades not because attraction is gone, but because the body doesn't feel safe enough to relax. Unprocessed emotions often show up during sex: resentment, unspoken needs. Unresolved conflict or emotional neglect don't disappear just because two people are physically close. Instead, they create subtle tension. The body remembers what the mind avoids. This is why sex can feel distant even when communication seems fine on the surface. Emotional health also shapes how people use sex. Some use intimacy to feel validated or reassured. Others use it to avoid vulnerability or conflict. And either approach is wrong, but when these patterns go unrecognized, sex becomes a coping mechanism rather than a connection. Pleasure becomes conditional, and intimacy loses its grounding. Another important aspect is self-worth. Adults who struggle with self-esteem may disconnect from pleasure or overperform to feel accepted. They may worry about how they look, how they're perceived, or whether they're enough. These internal pressures pull attention away from sensation and emotional presence. Pleasure requires permission, and self-criticism revokes it. Emotional health also influences boundaries. When someone doesn't feel safe expressing needs or limits, intimacy becomes confusing. They may say yes when they mean no, or stay silent when something doesn't feel right. Over time, this erodes trust, not just in the relationship, but in one's own body. Sex education rarely teaches adults how emotional repair affects intimacy. Apologies, validation, listening, and emotional attunement often restore desire more effectively than any physical technique. When emotional wounds are acknowledged, the body relaxes. Desire follows. Understanding sex as a mirror of emotional health shifts the focus away from blame. Instead of asking what's wrong with us sexually, the more useful question becomes, what's happening emotionally? This is sex education for adults they never taught. Great intimacy isn't created in the bedroom alone. It's built through emotional awareness, regulation, and honesty. When emotional health improves, sex often does too, naturally, gently, and without force. Key point 3 expanded. Communication is more important than chemistry. Many adults believe that great sex is something that either happens naturally or doesn't happen at all. They assume chemistry will carry intimacy forward and that if attraction is real, everything else will fall into place. But psychology tells a different story. Chemistry may start connection, but communication sustains it. Chemistry is instinctive. Communication is intentional. Early attraction often feels effortless because novelty, curiosity, and projection are doing the work. People assume alignment instead of building it. Over time, when assumptions replace curiosity, misunderstandings grow. Without communication, even strong chemistry begins to erode. Most sexual dissatisfaction doesn't come from lack of attraction. It comes from unspoken needs. Adults often hesitate to talk about desire, boundaries, preferences, or changes because they fear conflict or rejection. Silence becomes the default, but silence doesn't protect intimacy, it weakens it. Communication creates emotional safety. When people feel safe expressing curiosity or discomfort, the nervous system relaxes. Desire deepens. Pleasure becomes more accessible. Without that safety, intimacy becomes performative, focused on meeting expectations rather than experiencing connection. Another critical role of communication is adaptation. Adult live as change. Stress, aging, health, emotional shifts, and past experiences all influence desire. What felt good once may no longer feel the same. Without communication, these changes are misinterpreted as rejection or loss of attraction. With communication, they become shared experiences. Listening is as important as speaking. True communication isn't about defending or correcting. It's about understanding. When partners feel heard without judgment, defensiveness fades. Curiosity replaces fear. Intimacy becomes collaborative rather than transactional. Communication also keeps consent alive. Instead of assuming, partners check in. They ask. They respond. Consent becomes an ongoing conversation rather than a one-time agreement. This creates trust and emotional safety, both of which increase desire. Chemistry alone cannot resolve misalignment. When problems arise, chemistry offers intensity but not solutions. Communication provides clarity. It allows partners to repair emotional ruptures, express needs, and reconnect. Sex education rarely teaches adults how to talk about sex. As a result, many rely on guesswork, media narratives, or avoidance. But intimacy doesn't thrive on guessing. It thrives on honesty. This is sex education for adults they never taught. Attraction brings people together. Communication keeps them connected. When adults learn to communicate openly about desire, fear, boundaries, and change, intimacy becomes more resilient, more fulfilling, and far less confusing than chemistry alone could ever provide. Key point 4, expanded boundaries create better intimacy. Many adults carry the belief that boundaries are barriers to closeness. They worry that saying no, slowing things down, or expressing limits will reduce attraction or create distance. In reality, the opposite is true. Boundaries are what make intimacy safe, sustainable, and deeply satisfying. Boundaries communicate self-awareness. They tell another person, I know myself and I respect myself. This clarity builds trust. When people know where they stand, anxiety decreases. Desire grows in spaces where uncertainty is reduced, not increased. Psychologically, boundaries regulate the nervous system. When someone feels pressured or uncertain, the body moves into defense. Pleasure becomes harder to access. When boundaries are clear and respected, the body relaxes. Relaxation allows arousal, curiosity, and connection. One reason adults struggle with boundaries is fear of conflict. Many were taught to prioritize harmony over honesty. They learn to accommodate, suppress discomfort, or ignore internal signals to avoid tension. Over time, this self-betrayal erodes intimacy. Desire doesn't survive when someone feels unseen or overridden. Boundaries also protect emotional intimacy. Saying, this doesn't feel good for me, or I need more time, requires vulnerability. When those statements are met with respect rather than defensiveness, trust deepens. Intimacy becomes collaborative instead of coercive. Another overlooked aspect is that boundaries prevent resentment. When people say yes out of obligation, pressure, or fear of rejection, resentment builds quietly. The body remembers these moments even if the mind tries to dismiss them. Over time, desire fades as a form of self-protection. In long-term relationships, boundaries evolve. What felt comfortable at one stage may change due to stress, trauma, health, or emotional shifts. Without communication around boundaries, partners may misinterpret change as rejection. With communication, boundaries become a shared language rather than a source of conflict. Internal boundaries matter as much as external ones. Being able to pause, check in with yourself, and honor your internal signals strengthens your relationship with your body. Intimacy cannot feel safe when someone is disconnected from themselves. Sex education rarely teaches adults how to recognize or express boundaries without guilt or apology. But boundaries don't reduce intimacy. They define it. They make consent meaningful and desire authentic. This is sex education for adults they never taught. Boundaries don't push people away. They bring the right closeness closer. When boundaries are honored, intimacy stops being about endurance or obligation and becomes about mutual desire, safety, and trust. The Candido. And S, where real connection thrives. P.5 expanded. Presence matters more than performance. One of the most harmful messages adults absorb about sex is that it's something to be done well rather than something to be experienced fully. Performance culture teaches people to focus on outcomes, lasting longer, looking better, impressing their partner, instead of tuning into their own bodies and emotions. But real intimacy is built on presence, not performance. Presence means being mentally, emotionally, and physically engaged in the moment. It's the ability to notice sensation, emotion, and connection without judging or monitoring yourself. Performance pulls attention outward. Presence brings attention inward. When someone is performing, their nervous system is often activated by anxiety. They're thinking about how they're being perceived, whether they're doing enough, or if they're meeting expectations. Anxiety restricts pleasure. The body can't fully relax when the mind is busy evaluating. This is why people can have technically good sex that still feels empty. Presence allows the nervous system to settle. When the body feels safe, sensation becomes richer. Touch feels more vivid, emotional connection deepens, pleasure becomes accessible rather than forced. Performance also disconnects people from authentic desire. Instead of asking, "What do I feel?" they ask, "What should I do?" Over time, this creates confusion and dissatisfaction. Desire becomes something to enough, action, rather than something to respond to. Presence changes that. It invites curiosity. It allows people to slow down, pause, or shift without fear. When someone feels free to be honest about their experience, intimacy becomes real instead of scripted. Presence also strengthens communication. When you're attuned to yourself, you can express needs and boundaries more clearly. This builds trust. Trust deepens intimacy. Intimacy enhances pleasure. Many adults struggle with presence because vulnerability feels unsafe. Performance offers control. Presence requires surrender, not to another person, but to your own experience. That vulnerability is where connection lives. In long-term relationships, presence becomes even more important. Novelty fades, scripts lose their power. What remains is attention, curiosity, and emotional engagement. Presence keeps intimacy alive long after performance stops working. Sex education rarely teaches people how to regulate anxiety, stay connected to sensation, or feel safe in vulnerability. Instead, it teaches technique without awareness, but technique without presence is hollow. This is sex education for adults they never taught. Pleasure isn't something you earn, it's something you allow. When adults stop performing and start being present, intimacy becomes less pressured, more authentic, and far more satisfying, emotionally, psychologically, and physically. Give me conclusion of speech into 5 long paragraph and also give thank you and goodbye N. Ota, conclusion, sex education for adults. Paragraph 1. Sex education for adults is not about learning new techniques or fixing something that's broken. It's about understanding how desire, emotion, and connection actually work in real life. Most adults were taught what sex is, but not how intimacy feels when it's healthy, safe, and emotionally grounded. When we replace myths with awareness, intimacy becomes clearer and far less confusing. Paragraph 2. Desire, changing over time, is not a sign of failure. It's a signal. It reflects emotional safety, stress, self-perception, and connection. When adults stop personalizing these changes and start understanding them, shame dissolves. Desire doesn't need to be forced. It needs the right conditions to return. Paragraph 3, emotional health, communication, and boundaries are not optional extras in intimacy. They are the structure that holds it together. Sex reflects how safe, heard, and regulated we feel. When emotional awareness improves, intimacy deepens naturally. Connection becomes something built together, not something guessed or performed. Paragraph 4, presence over performance is what transforms sex from an act into an experience. When adults stop trying to impress and start allowing themselves to feel, pleasure becomes honest and connection becomes real. Intimacy thrives when there is room for imperfection, curiosity, and vulnerability. Paragraph 5. This is the sex education many adults never received but deeply need, educati. On that prioritizes awareness over shame, communication over silence, and connection over performance. When adults understand themselves, they create relationships that are not just intimate, but emotionally sustainable and deeply fulfilling. Thank you and goodbye note. Thank you for taking the time to listen, reflect, and learn. If this conversation helped you see intimacy, desire, or relationships with more clarity, then it has served its purpose. Take this understanding with you into your relationships with honesty, curiosity, and compassion. Thank you for being here and goodbye. Also give subscribe note for this channel. Subscribe note, closing CTA. If this talk helped you understand intimacy, desire, and adult relationships on a deeper level, then you'll find much more here. On the dating psychology, we explore real sex education, emotional connection, and the psychology behind attraction, honestly, respectfully, and without shame. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and join a community that believes growth starts with awareness. Thank you for watching. Stay curious, stay conscious, and I'll see you in the next video.